What's good, world? I might be back with another reaction video. Appreciate everybody that's been tuning in, all the real, all the real subscribers. And let's get a thanks to the people that actually stay to watch the full videos, because you guys are the real ones. We're back with another infographic show video. I feel like I haven't done one in a while. This one is why the army decided to kill its own soldiers. Not every army, not our army, just armies in general. Specific ones we're gonna get into. Let's get straight into it. Appreciate y'all, and let's go.
And today we'll
Alright, I think the volume's good now.
talk about why soldiers were executed by their own side for cowardice in war on the infographic show. In some wars, you could survive artillery, trenches, and gas and still end up dead. When most people think about military crimes, they picture desertion, someone running away from the army entirely, or mutiny, where soldiers rise up against their officers. But armies had another charge that was far, far more vague and equally as terrifying: cowardice. And sometimes it didn't matter if you were wounded or
That's crazy you could be labeled a coward when you were forced to fight in the war in general, right? Like, if you forced me to be here, how dare you call me a coward? I didn't want to be here anyway.
Terrified, or even honest, because in at least one case, the U.S. Army executed a man not for shooting the enemy, but for admitting he was too scared to fight. We'll come back to him. Unlike desertion, where you actually left your unit or disobeying an order, cowardice could mean almost anything that suggested you weren't brave enough. And it was this ambiguity that made it dangerous. That's because the criminal charges often overlapped. A soldier...
I was going to say, they're going to start lying as soon as somebody didn't want to listen. You already know what they're going to do. They're going to label them a coward, and they're going to get their ass killed.
Who refused to go over the top might be charged with disobeying orders, cowardice, or both. Someone who retreated without permission could face desertion charges or...
But then it's again, my bad to keep interrupting, but then again, it's like a whole setup, because if they force you to go there anyway, and then they force you to fight, and then you decide you don't want to fight, and then they kill you anyway, it's like you just threw me in this whole fucking mess.
Happy birthday, one of a kind, snack loving.
Or both. Someone who retreated without permission could face desertion charges or cowardice, depending on if their commanders had their tea or not that morning. The British Army during World War I had charges for abandoning your post, leaving a patrol, cowardice before the enemy, desertion, and shamefully casting away arms. And let's be honest, the lines between them were murky at best. But if you think the definitions would help clarify things, think again. In 1916, the British Army basically said desertion isn't just running away.
Of course, out of everybody, it was the British Army.
It is thinking about running away out loud, trying to desert.
I mean, it's... If you grow up in a country where you know you're going to go into the army anyway, you better do everything in your fucking power to prepare yourself for when that day comes.
Helping someone else desert, even nudging a guy toward the idea. And desertion accounted for roughly 75% of executions in the British Army between 1914 and 1920.
What the fuck?
Making it by far the most common capital offense.
Oh. Excuse me. Damn. Between 300 and 350 soldiers killed for cowardness or like desertion or whatever the fuck they try to label it as.
So much for that being a clear-cut charge compared to cowardice. For military commanders, charges for cowardice were all about containing a contagion they desperately feared. Panic is infectious on the battlefield.
Hold on. I gotta know how big their army was back then. They had 2.8 soldiers, and they were just wiping out anybody that was scared to go. That's crazy.
If one man breaks and runs, others might follow. Before you know it, entire units are collapsing. defensive lines are crumbling, and your strategic offensive has failed before it even began. So armies built a menu of punishments designed to destroy fear with more fear. And fear wasn't theoretical either. In 1917, the entire French army literally fell apart, and it almost cost them the entire war. A French general named Robert Nivelle promised that he could win World War I in 48 hours with one massive attack. His bosses were desperate after 3 years of trench warfare, so naturally they said yes. And the attack failed catastrophically. 187,000 French casualties with virtually no ground gained. Predictably, the soldiers snapped. Roughly half of France's army divisions refused to participate in further attacks that meant certain death. Around 3,400 soldiers were tried. Estimates of executions range from around 26 to 50, possibly even more. Thousands more received brutal prison sentences or were shipped to penal battalions in hellish colonial outposts. The crazy thing is that if the Germans had discovered half of the French army was essentially on strike, they probably could have won the war right then and there. Somehow, the Germans never figured it out. The mutinies nearly knocked France out of World War I entirely. Only luck kept the other side from discovering how vulnerable.
There's so many things that World War II, like the Germans could have did to win World War II. But because out of pure like stupidity and just rushing and probably the drugs he was on, Hitler just didn't realize half the shit that was going on and half the advantages that they really had. And that's why they got, you know, what they got, what they deserve.
In a situation like that, what could actually get you accused of cowardice? Refusing to advance when ordered is the obvious one. When the whistles blew to go over the top, you climbed that ladder and you ran straight into the machine gun fire, or else. Retreating without orders, even if staying meant certain death, could be considered cowardice. Leaving your post, whether as a sentry or falling asleep, or a soldier physically abandoning his comrades, certainly qualified. Self-inflicted wounds were treated as cowardice. Soldiers would often shoot themselves in the hand or foot, hoping for a blighty wound, something serious enough to get them sent home to Britain, but not crippling enough to keep them out of the post-war workforce. Medical officers got good at identifying these, and when caught, soldiers faced court-martial. Need evidence for how obsessed societies came with policing cowardice, even among civilians during war?
It just seems like no matter what, they would take advantage of that. So many people didn't want to be there anyway.
Wartime, look no further than the British White Feather Campaign during World War I. The gist was simple. When voluntary enlistments were down, women handed white feathers, symbols of cowardice, to men not in uniform, publicly shaming them into enlisting. Sounds patriotic, right? Except they kept giving feathers to the wrong people. Soldiers on leave got them. Wounded veterans got them. One man had to literally show a woman his missing hand before she would apologize. And then there was Jordan.
Women will do anything to knock a man off his fucking toes. I'm telling you right now, they will do anything. Not all women, but most women. Most women will.
Samson, who got handed a white feather while on his way to a public reception in his honor for winning the Victoria Cross at Gallipoli, Britain's highest award for bravery, and he still got labeled a coward in public. Multiple men died after receiving feathers, unable to bear the humiliation.
They just started handing them shit out like they were just like, oh, you're too good. Here's a feather.
Of being shamed for something they couldn't control. Others enlisted despite being medically unfit, too young, or working essential jobs. And plenty of them ended up trapped in the exact nightmare this whole system was supposedly meant to prevent. Men breaking under pressure and being punished for it.
That's literally what I was saying in the beginning of the video. It's literally a giant rat trap.
World War II, most armies had learned something from the previous war's excesses. The British abolished the death penalty for desertion entirely. They had seen the after effects of shooting shell-shocked teenagers in World War I and calling it justice. But not every army learned the same lessons. While the fear of being called a coward could drive men to death in civilian life, in certain cases military justice still had the power to actually execute you for it. And in 1944, that is exactly what happened to a 25-year-old replacement soldier from the United States who never wanted to be fighting in Europe in the first place. On October 9th, 1944, deployed somewhere in France, Eddie Slovic did something that thousands of other American soldiers had done during World War II. He deserted. Not technically cowardice on paper, but in wartime, desertion was treated like cowardice with a different title. Slovic was a Detroit native with a criminal record who'd been drafted despite his protests that he wasn't
I never heard of that shit before.
cut out for combat. He'd married, he got himself a job, and he was working at a plumbing and heating company when the Army lowered its draft standards and came calling. Turns out, when the Army needs bodies, his prior disqualification for his criminal record didn't matter anymore. In January 1944, Slovik was trained to be a rifleman, which wasn't a
They just threw him on the front lines of the British fucking Army.
Because he actually hated guns. When he arrived at the front, the sounds of artillery immediately terrified him. Within hours of joining his unit, he and another replacement got separated during a German bombardment. The other soldier eventually returned. Slovik ended up staying away for several weeks, spending time with a Canadian unit before turning himself in. He confessed in writing to desertion, and his commanders actually gave him a break. Basically, if he returned to his unit, they would forget the whole thing. Slovik went back, but when the unit came under fire, he refused to serve in a rifle company. He told his company commander he would run away again if forced into combat. Then he put it in writing again, essentially confessing.
He just was so against that shit. He was willing to die about his opinion and how he felt because he just didn't want to be around guns.
To desertion a second time and stating his intention to desert if sent to the front lines. This was more akin to a calculated refusal than outright panic, but it came at the worst time. Winter was approaching after a grueling campaign through France since D-Day. Desertion rates were climbing, and commanders wanted to send a message. And here's the problem. When thousands desert, you don't execute thousands, you execute one to scare the rest. When someone was accused of cowardice or desertion, the military justice system moved quickly, especially in wartime. The process usually started with an officer filing charges. In World War I, this often happened right in the trenches. Your commanding officer could charge you on the spot. Next came the trial, and calling it a trial is generous at best. A court-martial would be convened. Here's how it worked. 3 officers, no lawyers, no time, and sometimes no second chance. Your defending officer was overworked, inexperienced, or just checked out. The trials were shockingly brief. It could take less than half an hour to decide if you lived or died.
I'm telling you,
evidence was thin.
Once they label you a coward, they ain't giving you a break.
They were probably back at the front getting shot at. The officers would.
It's just like when back in the day when they used to label women witches. It's just like that. It's like they see you doing some little petty shit and they're gonna be like, he's a coward. Nope. Fuck the lawyer. Fuck the case. He's a coward.
And vote
Give him
on
a
guilt
feather.
and punishment. Once the sentence was passed, it went up the chain of command for review, along with any mitigating circumstances or pleas for mercy. But here's the catch. The system allowed executions to happen within 24 hours of the final decision. That meant that in practice, you might wait weeks or even months while your case crawled up the bureaucratic ladder to the generals, giving you false hope. And
you can wait. You have to literally sit through your
came
execution
the announcement
time.
of your sentence, and suddenly you had hours to live. Hours, not days. Private Thomas Highgate, just 17 years old, was the first British soldier executed on the Western Front in September 1914. He had just 45 minutes between being told his sentence was confirmed and being shot in front of
Damn,
companies of his own regiment.
17?
The general wanted him killed as publicly as possible to send a message. And don't expect anyone to care about your mental state. Soldiers who had been blown up by shells, who had documented nervous breakdowns, who were clearly suffering from what we now call PTSD. It just didn't matter. Medical officers testified that these men were faking it, malingering as they called it, when they really couldn't stop shaking or had gone catatonic from trauma.
That's so bad. That's what I'm saying. They were just using anything as a moment to label somebody a coward, and that's so fucked. You can't even have PTSD. Can't even get your arm blown off and be scared to do it again. They're gonna call you a coward.
The idea that combat could break even willing soldiers wasn't something most militaries accepted. Want to hear about an even worse system? Ancient Rome practiced decimation, which sounds about as brutal as it actually was. If a legion showed cowardice, every 10th man was selected by lottery and beaten to death by his fellow soldiers.
Alright, let's talk expedience.
Give everybody a bat and beat them, that's fucked.
So if you're thinking about building a home gym,
if you were found guilty, the range of punishments varied wildly depending on the army, the war, the specific offense, and sometimes just the mood of the commanding officer. Field punishment number 1, used by the British during World War I, was designed to be humiliating. The convicted soldier would be tied to a fixed object like a post, a wagon wheel, or a gun carriage in a crucifixion position for up to 2 hours a day for several weeks. This happened with...
All this causes is the people that are scared to be, that are too scared to get this. They'd rather die in the war now they'll toughen up, and then so they rather kill 2, 3, 100 to get 2 million on track.
Within view of the other soldiers, and sometimes within range of enemy fire. It was meant to shame you while your comrades watched. Penal battalions were another option. The Soviets made these infamous with their battalions during World War II. Stalin's Order Number 227, the famous not one step back rule, established these units for soldiers accused of cowardice, desertion, or other military crimes. The image of blocking detachments mowing down masses of retreating Soviet soldiers is largely mythology. Records from the NKVD, the secret police and intelligence agency, suggest around 1,000 deaths in the first 3 months of its implementation. But by October 1942, the concept had largely been dropped. Fortunately for them, most soldiers caught by blocking units were returned to their units or sent to penal battalions rather than shot. That said, the penal battalions were genuinely brutal. These units were assigned to the worst tasks, things like clearing minefields, assaulting fortified positions, leading attacks that regular units wouldn't survive. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers served in penal units during the war. Death rates were astronomical, though it wasn't the Suicide Squad arrangement that Hollywood depicts. Prison sentences were common for less severe cases.
It's crazy how they try to make it seem like war has changed so much, but in reality, it's probably almost the same.
When commanders didn't want to execute someone, hard labor, solitary confinement, loss of rank and pay, these were all options. But the ultimate punishment was execution, and this is where things got the darkest. The British Army executed 306 soldiers during World War I for cowardice, desertion, and related offenses. Many were teenagers, some had documented psychological trauma. The trials were perfunctory, the appeals process minimal. These men were tied to posts at dawn and shot by firing squads made up of their own comrades, men who sometimes deliberately aimed to miss, forcing officers to deliver the coup de grace shots. In 2006, these 306 soldiers were posthumously pardoned, the British government finally acknowledging that many had been victims of injustice. They had been suffering from what we now recognize as PTSD or shell shock. Others had simply been used as scapegoats for failures of command.
Imagine actually suffering from PTSD and your government's like, nah, you're a coward. Killed you.
It was almost always a firing
big target
squad,
on you.
though the details varied. Sometimes the condemned man's uniform buttons were removed and a paper target pinned over his heart so the shooters knew where to aim. Sometimes he was blindfolded, sometimes he faced his executioners. Usually it happened at dawn away from the regular troops, though sometimes it was done publicly to maximize the deterrent effect. The condemned often spent their last night writing letters home, knowing their families would be told they died dishonorably. The stigma, however, extended beyond death. Families of executed soldiers sometimes received reduced or no pensions, and the shame could follow them for generations. Look no further than Private Eddie Slovik.
I was going to say that, then the whole family's have to suffer too. He was court-martialed
on November 11, 1944. His trial lasted less than 2 hours. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. The sentence went up the chain of command, crossing the desk of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. Eisenhower confirmed it. Out of approximately 21,000 American soldiers tried for desertion during World War II and around 49 sentenced to death, Slovik would be the only one actually executed.
Damn.
On January 31st, 1945, in a small French village, Eddie Slovik was led to a courtyard. His last words were, "They're not shooting me for deserting the United States Army. They just need to make an example out of somebody, and I'm it because I'm an ex-con. They're shooting me for the bread and chewing gum I stole when I was 12 years old." A paper target was pinned to his jacket over his heart.
That's crazy.
12 soldiers from his division formed the firing squad. At 10:04 a.m., all 12 fired their M1 Garand rifles, and Slovik was hit simultaneously in the neck, shoulder, chest, heart, and arm. But somehow he didn't die instantly. Instead, he faded as the firing squad were preparing for their second volley. He was buried in a secret grave with other American soldiers executed for sexual crimes and murder. Criminals in the Army's eyes are unworthy of burial among honorable dead. His wife didn't learn the true circumstances of his death for years, told only that he'd been killed in action. She and others would petition multiple U.S. presidents to secure a posthumous pardon for Slovik. Each was denied. Eddie Slovik remains the only American soldier executed for desertion since the Civil War, though thousands committed the same
he wasn't even executed by
offense. He was made an example of during a desperate moment when commanders felt they needed to send a message about discipline. Cowardice wasn't always cowardice.
It was just a
sometimes
backup, and he got
sometimes
murdered.
it was exhaustion, and sometimes it was just one unlucky man chosen to be the warning.
That shit's crazy. Y'all let me know what you think about this. You know, you can fight for something, but to get killed by the thing you're fighting for, because you didn't do it how they wanted you to, is crazy. Appreciate y'all. Y'all let me know what you think. I'm out of here. I just watch the videos. I do the reaction. Y'all let me know what you think. I'm out of here.